Let's talk
Tariffs.
about the really scary thing, the Trump tariffs. This is what
So,
worries me.
and I don't know on Truth Social. I'm just gonna say Trump tweeted on Truth Social. I don't know what you actually
It
do when you
was
do
Truth
on Truth.
Social.
But is it a tweet? It's not really a tweet, but
It's a post, I
a
guess.
post. Okay, it's a
It's a
post on
truth.
Truth Social.
Was it a truthism?
A truthism. So on day one in office, a 25% tariffs on all products from Mexico and Canada, and an extra 10% tariff on China, because the extra 10% on China is because they didn't uphold their promises of stopping drug traffickers. So that
Fentanyl.
makes China 60% plus 10% more, and the rest of the world's goods 20%. Now, what happened was right away, the Canadian dollar is now at a 4-year low. The Mexican peso is the weakest since 2022. The China's yuan edged lower. So the value of the US dollar is increasing. Going back to what we talked about last week, which is the opposite of Bitcoin, right? Like do you bet on Trump, who really wants the US to be the number one and the US dollar to be number one? That's the opposite of Bitcoin. But what's happening now, Blake, is you're seeing companies start making statements about these tariffs. So Walmart, Lowe's, AutoZone, Dollar Tree, they're basically saying they're going to raise prices. Walmart, this is the Walmart CFO, recently said that if President-elect, in regards to the tariffs, we never want to raise prices. Our model is everyday low prices, but there probably will be cases where prices will go up for consumers. Lowell's CEO expressed concern, saying they're talking to suppliers to understand how the tariffs might affect prices. AutoZone CEO, they said they plan to hike prices even before the tariffs go into effect. And Dollar Tree, I didn't know this was already like $1.25 tree. Apparently it's not Dollar Tree anymore, but they're going to have to go up to become $1.50 tree. But so I went on a little research because I was wondering, like, how is this going to affect outsourced labor? And so tariffs aren't directly on outsourced labor because a lot of accounting firms use lots of outsourced labor.
Right.
Right. But as the dollar goes up, that means the outsourced labor is going to be cheaper. So this is actually good for accounting firms using outsourced labor. The labor will be cheaper. And then if some of these countries that are manufacturing take economic hits because of this, now there's a surplus of labor, also causing even more outsourced labor to be cheaper. And the tariffs don't do this. So in a weird way, this could actually benefit accounting firms. Accounting firm profits could be up because of these tariffs, which would be good because you're going to need it to go shopping at Walmart.
Yeah, I mean, this is the thing that really concerns me is that, like, if the goal of the Trump administration is to bring down inflation, this is a surefire way to do the opposite, because the cost of tariffs has been proven time and time again to be borne by the importer, us, not China, not Mexico, not Canada. It's U.S. consumers who pay the tariff in the form of higher prices. It gets passed on to the consumer. And sure, yeah, maybe a tiny amount gets absorbed by the manufacturer and maybe a tiny amount gets absorbed by the importer, but most of the time their margins are already pretty thin. And so it has to get passed on to the consumer. So yeah, 25% tariff and an additional 10% on China, would that make it 35%? You know, that would be like a huge increase in the price of everything imported from China that's at Walmart, which is a lot of stuff.
Apparently, it's a third of the stuff. They said 2/3 is still is made in the U.S. But I can already see 2025. We're going to have a no guacamole, no avocado policy at restaurants. I can already see it.
Well, you'll get the surcharge everywhere, right? The Chipotle policy.
Yeah, they wanted the guacamole. I'm like, no way, it's too expensive for those avocados from Mexico. And you can't even hoard that. You can't hoard the avocados because they don't last.
Right.
You're going to have to pay the 20% extra tariff.
So, I mean, the hope here that I've read is online, like the hopeful view is that this is simply a negotiating tactic and that Trump is using the threat of tariffs as leverage to get what he wants when it comes to Mexico and Canada helping to stem the flow of illegal immigration, get them to do it rather than us doing it. So remember in the last Trump presidency, there were stories about how people would, set up shop in the Trump hotel and work on getting exclusions to these tariffs.
Yeah.
The last tariffs, right? So even though, like in the first term, Trump imposed tariffs, but then allowed companies to lobby for exemptions. And many, many, many companies applied for tariff exemptions. There were over 50,000 requests to the U.S. Trade Representative and nearly 500,000 to the Commerce Department. And it prompted a huge surge in lobbying efforts, with law firms filing hundreds of thousands of exemption requests on behalf of companies. And studies have found that exemptions were more likely to be granted to companies contributing to Republicans, while those supporting Democrats were less successful. That is the definition of a political swamp. When you donate money and you get a advantage over your rivals. Like, we do not want this sort of system where people are lobbying for exemptions to get like a huge advantage in terms of their cost structure over their rivals. And it was very inconsistent, and there was lack of transparency in how this was done. And we're seeing this happen again. Companies are engaging lawyers and lobbyists preemptively to navigate and get exemptions to these tariffs. And the tariffs are even bigger, so the stakes are even higher here. And the problem for small businesses, and this is the challenge for us as accountants advising small businesses, is that they do not have the lobbyists and the lawyers to get these exemptions. So it puts small businesses at a potentially huge disadvantage versus the established players that can get it. And it also is a waste of energy, because companies are focusing now on securing exemptions rather than improving productivity, creating jobs, and lowering costs. So tariffs are taxes. I think that is what we need to do as a profession, is we need to educate the public that tariffs are taxes. So when Trump says, I'm going to put in place a 25% tariff, it's not a punishment on China, it's a tax on Americans and American businesses.
Tariffs are taxes. That's the new shirt. That's your
Tariffs are
2025
taxes.
slogan. You put that on your LinkedIn profile.
And look, I know many of our listeners are supporters of the Trump administration, and I support many of the policies and prospective policies of the Trump administration. We were talking last episode about the Department of Governmental Efficiency, and I think that would be a great thing. We could probably cut a ton of bloat, and I love that idea. But this one just does not make sense to me, and the business community and the accounting profession have to do something to mitigate this risk, because this is the sort of thing that could trigger a recession. Or, as we saw with the tax foundation analysis, could reduce economic growth. GDP could go down 1.5% or more in a single year, cumulatively over many years. That's a lot over time. That reduction,
people at the
in
bottom
growth,
get hurt the most in a situation like that.
And actually, when you consider that, I don't know, what do we have, 2 to 3% GDP over the last year? Most of that was caused by government spending. So if you strip out the government spending, the actual economic growth was less than the impact of these tariffs. So we would actually have net negative private sector economic growth if these well, I don't know what the analysis would be of the 25%, because I think they analyze 60% on China and 10% on other countries. So they'll have to do a reanalysis, but it could wipe out the private sector gains. That's my concern.